and welcome to this week's edition of Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett. Thank you so much for joining me this October evening. I'm so excited to be with you. This week I have a guest, Gia Honeycutt, and she is the founder of the Hypatia Institute, and she's also founder of GL Honeycutt Consulting. Gia has done some amazing things in her career. Our paths crossed as a result of some of the branding work that both she and I do, and we're going to spend some time talking about the things that she's doing in leadership to prepare future fellows, and also the things that she's done in marketing and branding, consulting, and everything under the sun. Hey, Gia, how are you?
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being on Think Big.
Well, I'm really excited to be here, and it's a great opportunity to talk about the Institute and my college fellows and share a little bit about what we've been doing. So
please tell us.
To it.
Well, tell us. Jump right in. Let's start talking about Hypatia Institute.
Sure. Well, the Hypatia Institute is a leadership education and development organization, and we're focused on closing the competitive advantage gap for women, people of color, and people from low opportunity communities. And when I talk about the competitive advantage gap, I'm really talking about those intangibles, those things that we learn around our dining room tables, that we learn from family, friends, from our communities, from the institutions that we interact with. And that can make a difference depending on where you live and what you experience. And I think we've all seen that. We've seen those differences that pan out over a lifetime. And so we're really focused on addressing those different kinds of advantages and disadvantages and helping people build strategies to really take advantage of their networks and learn how to leverage what they have as assets.
So first of all, Hypatia Institute, Hypatia in itself is a very interesting, beautiful word. Where does that come from?
Well, Hypatia of Alexandria, Egypt was a philosopher, an astronomer, a mathematician, and she taught those who others weren't teaching. And so I really thought that's what we're doing here. We're teaching those people who have not gotten to have the advantage of these lessons. And it really is in the spirit of Hypatia.
Right. When I was doing a little research on Hypatia, I learned that she walked the streets,
right,
sharing information and really being that beacon of intelligence for people who might not otherwise have had access. Was that at all inspiring to you?
Yes. I mean, I knew that I wanted to start a leadership institute. And when she was walking the streets, talking to people, they could ask her any questions about philosophy, about Socrates, about Plato, and she would answer, right? And so we're here to provide answers and to have those discussions and for everyone to learn something from that experience.
So exactly what led you to create the organization?
Well, over a lifetime, I noticed first when I was in college and then continuously, I realized what I was straddling in terms of socioeconomic dynamics. And then more recently, I saw what people in organizations I was involved with were straddling, especially people of color and women, of not having the advantages and the confidence to move forward in certain ways that white males would assume that they can. And that has a strong effect to people who come from low-income communities. If you come from rural or urban or even suburban communities where you don't have a lot of resources, it makes a difference in how you go after opportunity, how you identify opportunity. And so that's what we're really focused on, is helping people see those opportunities, helping them understand the architecture of power and how to leverage their networks.
One thing that you said earlier was culture and sitting around the table and talking. How do you think that shapes people's ability to approach the business world or put their foot out there when it comes to building a career for themselves?
Sure. I think, I can speak to my own experience, and that is, growing up in a family where my grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman, and where there were a ton of books around me and a ton of books about Black history. And so I never really had the thinking of being too hesitant about something. I was always more likely to step into something. I was always more likely to make that phone call.
Right. Were you encouraged to?
My family was always just sort of flabbergasted. So, I had a big cake I was baking one year for the holidays, and I didn't understand how long I would have to bake it. I called the baking line, the 800 number, and everybody in the family was like, "Oh my God, she called an 800 number." And we would have never thought to do that. And that's where the information is supposed to come from. And that's just how I am. I try to figure out how to get there. And I don't usually worry as much about the fact that it's hard to get there.
Well, we're going to talk about branding later and all of the things that you do in the creative sense, but it sounds as if you started thinking outside of the box as a younger person.
Perhaps.
Yeah. So tell us about the College Fellowship Program.
Sure. It's actually really exciting, the fellowship program, because we're taking freshmen and sophomores, first and second year students, and helping them learn how to strategically plan,
Right.
how to be more assertive, how to be confident and resilient. For instance, a lot of young people, if they're pursuing an informational interview, they'll send the email message, and then maybe they don't want to hear back from that busy person.
Right.
And they won't follow up. And so just teaching them how to continue to pursue it and how to network and how to decide what goals they want and be discerning.
Right.
And how to decide what information is good for you and how to decide what aligns with what's important to you.
Right.
What are your goals and what things here, what people here match up with that and are good to have in your life.
Well, I mean, you could have chosen elementary school or middle school or
Right.
high school students. You chose undergraduate students.
Well, it's the first program. And I figured, stay with what you know the best.
Right.
And so with small children, I love small children. Am I experienced in teaching small children? Not so much. I do sometimes talk to high school students. In fact, we're planning on starting a new program. We're about to pilot test it of mini coaching sessions.
Wow.
And really working with kids who are connected to the child welfare system or to the court system and sitting down with them for about 30 minutes. They've sent their resume. And we're going to have a conversation about their one or two biggest goals
Right.
and how they can get there, and then follow up with them later.
And the High Patient Institute and the students, where are which universities are they drawing from? Is it in the DC metro area?
Sure. For the College Fellowship Program, we're drawing them from Northern Virginia, DC, and Maryland.
Okay.
If they're from further away, if you go to ODU, to Old Dominion,
Yeah.
and you want to come and you can make the monthly meetings, then by all means, please apply.
Right.
And we meet in different places. We're not always in the same location. So, for instance, this year I've already booked a meeting at one of the national museums. I don't want to say right now,
Right.
but I've booked a speaker and, getting the kids a pass to explore the museum. I have a friend who is going to connect us and book us for one of the months at one of the major tech companies in their spot. So we really try to look for different places, small businesses and big businesses, and new experiences. And whenever we book something somewhere, we're having that person who's hosting talk about themselves,
Right.
talk about their careers, and you get a sense of where things can take you.
Well, when I was running my company, I worked with a couple women in business, and we created a young women's entrepreneurship program for Pathways. It's an organization that focuses on entrepreneurship out of Anne Arundel County.
Okay.
And one of the things that we did on a regular basis was invite business owners in to share some of their expertise. And they always, welcomed us. They always wanted to come in and open their doors to their organization, allow for us to come and do tours. Are you finding the same thing, that people want to share with the young professionals that you're helping to mold?
Yes, I do. And, they want to offer space. They want to offer time.
Right.
They're open to being mentors, which we get every fellow a mentor, and we also get them informational interviews. That's probably the easiest sell, is the informational interviews.
Right.
For instance, our first fellow, she knew she wanted to study economics. She knew she wanted to study law, and that she wanted to make a difference in people's lives. She wasn't quite sure what that would look like. And so I introduced her to a friend of mine from grad school who works at the Brookings Institute, one of the biggest think tanks in DC. And I introduced her to another friend who had worked in public interest law, had been on the private side, had been on the public side, and could really give her a sense of what a career like that looks like.
Right.
And all you need is an hour of time so they can ask you great questions. We talk to them about asking great questions,
Yeah.
and really learn where a career can take them.
So for that undergraduate freshman or sophomore who's watching this episode right now and they're wondering what is that application process like? What is the commitment like for me every semester or every year? What does that look like for them?
Sure. The program starts in January. So right now we're in the application period. They're open until December 1st. You go to hypatientinstitute.org. So HYPATIAN institute.org, and it's an online application. We can send you a PDF if you want to write it out and scan it in and send it to us, but
Right.
most students are adapted to the internet anyway. So you fill out the application. There's a one-page essay. We want you to also upload your grades from the last semester, maybe
Right.
from high school if you don't have them yet, and send us a couple of references, and they can also go online and do it. So they don't have to put something on letterhead. They can go in and type a reference for you.
So you also have this executive leadership program. Now, how does that differ from the fellows program?
Well, it differs a little bit. For instance, the fellows is January to May, just second semester. The executive leadership program, which we're planning to roll out next fall, that is going to have a slightly different application. We're going to focus on a lot of the same areas, but really at a completely different place. And you've seen things like Leadership Fairfax or
Yeah.
Leadership Greater Washington. A lot of these programs, particularly in the suburbs, are not very culturally competent. And so you really, really want to have something that meets people where they're at and really speaks to their background and their experience.
So you say culturally competent?
Culturally
Oh,
competent.
culturally
Culturally
competent. Oh, got it.
competent.
Okay, wonderful. So you were saying it doesn't really represent a broad enough mix of what the demography might be in that community or so?
There are not as many people of color in
Got
those groups. They do a good balance. There's a good balance of women and men usually. Not as good a balance of cultural diversity or race or ethnicity.
Got it.
And then also it's really starting from a place of you're already doing these things. You're already sort of at a certain level of leadership.
Right.
And instead of speaking to the kinds of challenges and barriers you might be facing
Yeah.
as a person of color and as a woman. And so we're really fashioning it around that. It'll be a 6-month program running from October until March.
And where's the person who qualifies for that in their career or in education? Are they still in undergrad or are they in their career?
They're going to be in their career. For
Right.
the executive program, you're already going to be probably in your late 20s. You could be in your mid-20s or later. And you're sort of mid-level somewhere in your career, probably 5 to 10 years, maybe 15. And you have some ambitions and you want to figure out how to get there. And you want to grow your network more exponentially by the people who you'll meet in the program, by who you'll share this program with. And then use this immediately. And one of the things we try to make sure happens in all of our programs is that you're getting tools or information that's immediately actionable.
Right. So you have the fellows program, you have the executive leadership program, you have another program though, right?
Well, the other thing that we're about to launch is First Leadership Lesson.
Yeah.
And that's a video program, a video series where we're asking people to do a 1 to 2 minute video about what their first leadership lesson was or what their most salient leadership lesson was. And so we have a few videos already to kick it off. And we're about to finish editing those and then start to load it, encourage people to tell us and to tell everyone, because our main theme with the Institute is everyone is born to lead.
Right.
You have different paths getting there. There's no one way to be a leader. There's no one type of leader. So often we look at presidents and politicians and corporate titans to be these leaders, and that's
Right.
our ideal of what it takes to be a leader. We forget about our teachers. We forget about our parents and other people in our lives who are leaders. That corporate titan, that's the big L lead. That's the sexy, attractive, glamorous looking, not always glamorous, but looks glamorous kinds of leadership.
Right.
The little L are the things that are so important, sort of your discernment, how you align things, how you make decisions in your life and decide to move forward, how you strategize. That's what everyday leadership is about. And so there's so many people who have great examples of what it means to be a leader. And so we really want to hear from people just from all walks of life who tell us what is the best leadership lesson you've ever had.
Right. Do you believe leaders are born or made?
I believe both. I think everyone is born to lead, and it's a matter of landing on what that match is for you. I just posted recently. Our podcast is called Born Leader, and we had an interview with Yul James, who is the maestro for the Washington Metropolitan Philharmonic Association, which is in Alexandria. And he's been maestro for quite some time, for a couple of decades probably, and took over when they were in a lot of transition. And he had this background from the Navy in doing organizational development and consulting within the agency,
Right.
but then also on his own as a consultant. And he brought that to bear on his work in terms of leading and growing this organization, which now has a much bigger budget. They've started hiring permanent staff to help them manage things. And he really speaks to what it means to start a small nonprofit or to run a small nonprofit. And so there are a lot of good examples of people in our immediate community who we don't know.
In conversations that you have with those who approach you, either for the Fellows Program or for the Executive Leadership Program, how do you help them understand the benefits of the program and also who best benefits from the High Patient Institute?
Well, there are two stories. One is there was a teacher in high school who was really helpful to me, and I asked him, like a couple of years ago, and said, "So why did you?" And he said, "You looked like you were ready to succeed." So I'm looking for that hunger in someone, that they're ready to move to the next step, that they're interested in this, that they have skin in the game, and that they're going to make a difference to the people in the program with them.
Right.
And then also, several years ago, I don't know if we're going to talk about how long ago this was,
Well,
but a friend said to me, she said, "You're one of the beautiful people, but you don't think you are. But you are." And I didn't even really understand this. This was back in the 90s.
right.
And
Well, that was kind of early for having those kinds of,
Hell yes.
soul-searching conversations.
Soul-searching
We have
conversations.
evolved as a society, especially in small business, where, we can really talk about things like that. But back then, it was kind of black and
It
white.
was kind of strange, but
Yeah.
she's a very eclectic and interesting person. And she's my age, she's our age, right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have that strike me until I was pursuing a master's degree. And it's a conversation I've since had with someone else. I had a colleague who was somewhat jaded, and I had brought someone to meet with them or with her to figure out a deal. And so she was so focused on so many other things that this person, wasn't going to care about. They're just wondering if this is going to be a match.
Right.
And it kind of blew up the deal. And so afterwards, I sat down with her, I had a conversation with her, and I told her, "You are one of the beautiful people. You don't think you are, but you are." I just
Yeah.
said the exact same words. And I said, this person, they didn't care about these things. This is who you are. This is what you're doing and what
Right.
you're involved in. And this is how you're awesome. And you need to understand that.
And when you were talking about beautiful, you're talking about the essence of the person. And that person who you spoke with years ago, back in the 90s, was talking about your essence.
Right.
Right, which you didn't see at that time, but it took some time to realize it. Wow,
It's about your strength. It's
Well,
about your inner strength.
that's powerful. So exactly how long did it take you to pull together the idea and solidify the High Patient Institute, because it really is a unique thing that you're doing, not just from the name, but putting it all together, determining who you're going to service and how you're going to help them propel, into their futures.
I started thinking about it about 5 or 6 years ago. And I remember telling a mentor that I wanted to do leadership. And he was like, you might need some more experience. And I didn't listen because if I did, I would have never started anything. And so, in my past life, I was co-founder and chairman of the Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce.
I can't wait to talk about that.
And after I had a chance to breathe, after I retired from the chamber, this is what I landed on to start. Was, I was passionate about it. It's something I wanted to do. And so now the organization's almost 3 years old.
Right. Well, speaking of the Northern Virginia Black Chamber of Commerce, you have run and started up several organizations. How far does that go back? What does that look like in the beginning?
My first startup was a nonprofit startup called Peace America, the Peace America Foundation. And it was with one of my late friends from college. And we had a community wealth enterprise, is what they called it, a nonprofit that was focused on programs and services that people wanted anyways. And so you make more money that way.
Yeah.
And we were doing partnerships. We had the National Hockey League interested, Fashion Cafe. Do you remember Fashion Cafe?
I don't think so.
Fashion models wanted to have sort of a Planet Hollywood, a restaurant, and they started that in New York. Do you remember that?
Gosh.
Right. And Julius was this amazing networker.
Yeah.
He was phenomenal. He was everywhere we went, someone knew him.
Yeah.
I swear someone knew him. And we had some interesting ideas. And, I was doing that for probably about 5 years. It was a wild time. I was young. I was working during the day. Even part of that time I was pursuing a graduate program.
Right.
And then I was doing this with Julia.
Wow.
And that was my first experience in really entrepreneurship.
Right. I mean, did you have a path that you were pursuing, or was it just, really organic for you, or you were just following your heart or following what you were interested in?
Well, I was already interested in violence prevention because we were working at the intersection of violence prevention and peace promotion. I had worked in educational equity, and part of that was talking about gendered violence. The job I had when I started working with him was with the National Network of Violence Prevention Practitioners. So we were focused on youth violence prevention with educators, people from justice, people who worked in youth programs, an intersectional group of folks. And so it was really good. It synced right with what I was doing.
Right. I would go as far as to call you a social serial entrepreneur, because it sounds to me, and from what I know about your background, is that the various things that you have started up, which have been terribly successful, have all been mission driven. So they're not just about the bottom line or creating a savvy product or, becoming, the first to do something at the goal line, but more so changing lives and doing something for the greater good of society. That's a big, big thing. And so I guess the person who was in your 90s who said that, you were one of those beautiful people was absolutely right, because you have done so many different things when it comes to business. I mean, when I met you, you were doing things in the Black Chamber, and that has evolved to the High Patient Institute today. But do you still have your fingers out there in that entrepreneur space and supporting people?
Well, a little bit, but it's all I can do to run 2 businesses right now.
Right.
So sometimes I'll go and have coffee with someone. For instance, I just met a new entrepreneur at a women's leadership event the other day, and she's got this makeup thing. It's very interesting, and I told her, happy to have coffee with you.
Right.
And that's the easiest thing to offer. Let's go out for coffee. buy me a cup of coffee. Not everyone can buy me a cup of coffee and pick my brain
Right.
because, you want to get paid for your work.
Absolutely.
But, particularly young people, you
Yeah.
want to help them. You want
Right.
to help them take their leap.
Well, speaking of you saying that you were at a leadership event, how do you define leadership in itself?
It's really about creating a vision and pursuing that vision and aligning things with that pursuit. There's so many different things that are important in leadership. It's not only having that alignment and having that vision, but really planning and taking steps and being strategic, right? Because that's your self-leadership.
Right.
And you do the same kinds of things for an organization, but on a different scale and with a different scope. And so, and really displaying what you think is important. So living your leadership on a daily basis and the things that you do and in the ways that you communicate. And that's an ongoing lesson for probably just about everybody.
Do you tap into leadership sort of programs or find ways to stay filled yourself as a leader so that you remain effective and with the times and speaking the same language that today's, rising professionals are speaking?
Right. I think it's about filling your well, right? Is what you're getting at.
Right.
And I find it really energizing to go to these kinds of events and to hear other people talk because it's a very isolated kind of experience to be starting an organization, to be working in it, mostly alone. I also have a consultant who contracts with me to do some of the work. And so any entrepreneur, you're just starting this business, you're in your garage, you're in your house, and you don't get a lot of contact unless you make yourself go out. And it's so important to go out because that's where you find your support network.
So let's switch gears to the Black Chamber. How did that actually come about?
Wow.
Because that's a very, very big thing.
Yeah, and we didn't realize how big it was going to be at first. I mean, we talked numbers. We're like, we're going to have 600 members by such and such a date, which did not happen. And we started out sitting around a dining room table, drinking wine, hashing this thing out and going and doing some research and coming back and hashing out more. And I had been thinking a social network, a social network for businesses.
Yeah. And do you mean online or do you mean
online
just,
network?
Okay.
Right. And then one of my colleagues wanted to do a chamber. And so I looked into what a chamber was. I looked at other Black chambers around the country. The thing that I loved was the services that they offered and the fact that you could start a social network within a chamber if you wanted to. The things I didn't love was they didn't have a refined brand necessarily. And so we really tried to do that with the Black Chamber, with the Northern Virginia Black Chamber.
Right. Well, you're brazen maven herself, so we'll spend some time talking about branding and marketing. I will be right back with Gia Honeycutt in just a second. Stay right there. Welcome back to Think Big. I'm your host, Akia Garnett, and I'm joined this week by Gia Honeycutt, and she is the founder of the High Patient Institute. She's also the founder of GL Honeycutt Consulting, and you've done, some great things. We've been talking about that. One of the things that I know about you is that you also have launched a brand, and it's called Brazen Maven. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. It really is a marketing, branding arm of my business. And there was a journey to that brand. There was a branding process for myself and landing upon it, because originally I was just GL Honeycutt Consulting, but no one could fold in all the things that I wanted to do, that I love to do underneath that. It didn't connect for them, for the average person. And so I created Weirding Word. And that was a little bit more creative for them. It's a science fiction reference. We won't get into that.
Right.
And so that was publishing and the marketing, and still there was not a connect. And so I started seeing a lot of language about mavens, about marketing mavens, throughout the business networks and online. And I created Brazen Maven out of that. And really teaching people to be bold and purposeful with what they're doing around their marketing and developing their brand. And when I do my workshops, I really focus with people on three components. One is message, two is design, and three is really content. Like, how does that all come together? And I talk to them about examples of, for instance, cruise lines. If you see Princess Cruises, you're thinking something maybe a little high end. If you're thinking Royal Caribbean, you're thinking something active and fun. If it's Carnival, it's a party, right? And so they're very distinctive looks in terms of the way that they shape everything, how they frame what they're doing. And then it has to do with your culture as well. What's your corporate culture? What do you want it to be? Because that's important to your brand.
Right. And so you worked with and you work with small business owners and entrepreneurs from that conceptual to the actual manifestation or output phase. What are some main things that you help small businesses do in a technical sense?
Right. Well, my business has evolved. And so what I'm really focused on now is helping people strategize around their social media presence, helping them develop their leadership in their own businesses. So who do they need to bring in as advisors, their small board of advisors? How do they want to make their strategic plan for their whole company? One of the really fun things I got to do was help with the PR for a crowdfunding campaign, which was successful. And really support what they were doing in terms of their interviews, promoting it. We raised the cash, but unfortunately not all of it was raised on the platform. So that was a little disappointing not to see that rise, but very glad that they got the money.
I'm assuming it was one that they actually got to keep it, right?
They got a check.
Good.
Yes, they didn't have to pay any fees.
Well, that's what matters.
And, I think one of our successes with the Black Chamber was the branding, because we didn't have anything else when we started. We didn't have any money. We all put in like $200 a piece, and that's what we were living on. So our first mixer event out in Arlington, we drew probably about 150 or so people into this really, really tiny room in Busboys and Poets over in Shirlington. And it was hot, but it was great. All these people who were interested in a chamber. And so we really had found a niche. And not just a chamber, but a chamber that really focused on the needs of a particular minority subset in the community, in the Northern Virginia community. And, that's underserved. And so you were doing and, probably are still impacting, even if it's indirectly, something that really was overlooked, and certainly just without resources today, and I have worked for a minority-owned business, and so I know that there are a different type of and set of challenges that minority-owned firms face. And so to you, I salute you for taking that step to create a platform and an environment where ideas can be exchanged and businesses can pull themselves together so that they can present them wares in a very intelligent way. So again, thank you for your contribution in that way and for sharing your success story. So when it comes to High Patient Institute, I'm assuming that you were able to take all of that knowledge and expertise and experience and apply it to the creation of that brand. Well, it really impacted how I structured the business and certainly how I branded it. And it came down to choosing the colors,
Right.
choosing a tagline, everyone is born to lead, and having that mean something to people. And because of the type of business it is, because of our goals, because of how we talk about leadership, it's very different from what anybody has experienced. So we also have to do a lot of education.
Right.
And we just try to keep the brand very clean, very upbeat, very focused. Hypatia was in Alexandria, Egypt. We use
Right.
Egyptian blue.
Yeah.
But also we're trying to use some contemporary colors like the green and the gold that we
Right.
use.
I mean, it's very symbolic. I
yeah.
think it's and I can see all of that in it. And again, as I did the research and I started to look back, I can see where you were able to pull aspects from that historical context, and I just think that's great. Do you have any particular success stories from Hypatia Institute that really stands out for you?
Sure. It's our college fellows right now. They are fantastic. None of them are currently in the program, but, just today I was texting with one of them who has family in Puerto Rico.
Right.
The other day I did an informational introduction interview connection for another so
Right.
that they can continue to pursue their goals. And, during the session last year, or during the program last year, one of our fellows felt confident enough to run for student government. She's now vice president of her student government.
Wow.
She's doing a different kind of work study she's very excited about that's within her goals and in the major that she wants to pursue. Another fellow was really able to figure out what was important to him with an internship that really wasn't giving him anything back over the summer. So he completely shifted and pivoted and changed direction, really.
Yeah.
Another fellow, our first fellow, she had an opportunity to go to South Africa for an internship this past summer. And she's going to Europe for another one over the winter break.
Wow.
And she's doing amazing things.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're out there and you're watching and you're an undergraduate freshman or a sophomore, right? You need to check out what they're doing at Hypatia Institute, because these are some amazing things. I mean, if I were still an undergrad and I knew about this, I might be knocking on your door to see if I can take advantage of some of your services. So, question, are you involved in any policy work whatsoever? Because it's one thing to work in community, it's one thing to work at that level where you're working directly with people, but it's another thing to dwell in the policy sphere, where you can start to shape legislation and discussions that might impact not only the community where you are, but other communities as well.
Right. Well, I'm an election officer, so I encourage everybody to vote. Because right now in Virginia, for instance, there are elections every single year. And those local elections matter so much more than people think. They wait until the presidential election. That's when my vote counts. No, your vote counts right now, because whatever they do at the federal level, it's the people in your state and the people in your municipality who are going to affect how that's implemented, how the money gets there, if it's really fair to you. Right? And so it's important for you to pay attention to what those state policies are. When I was at the chamber right before the last gubernatorial election, I was always telling Terry McAuliffe, who's now our governor, that we really needed more supplier diversity support from the state, that all of this money, I think it was something like $25 million, was going out to small businesses. And we were not, as minority-owned firms, getting a lot of that. And when I say minority-owned, I mean all minority-owned.
Sure.
All women-owned included in that, 2% of the contracts. And that was over a 10-year period. So 2 studies, 10 years apart, still stayed at the same place.
Right.
And so what was really gratifying was one of the first proclamations he made were goals for what they were going to do around supplier diversity.
Yeah.
Now, was that me by myself? I can't claim that, but I know that every time I talk to him about that.
Right. And how did you get an understanding of policy and where to actually jump in?
I really got an understanding from school. I went and pursued a 1-year program at UMass Boston, Women in Politics and Government, which is now a master's program. And I got my master's degree, my Master of Public Policy at the University of Chicago, and focused on poverty and inequality for my concentration. And so I learned so much about policy, about understanding quantitative and qualitative research and what people are really saying to you. When I listen to politicians, when I'm thinking about policy policy and advocacy. For instance, the other day I was at one of these informational events with the candidates speaking to us. First, a politician started talking about months, data related to a month. Mm-hmm. And then he started talking about a year. And then he talked about a year from 2013 or something.
Right.
And so there's all this data being mixed up. And it's hard for people to follow. You know, you might not hear this person talk again another time. This might be your only chance to focus on them.
Right.
And you're not getting clear data. And so I found that so useful in really zeroing in on what people are saying, really zeroing in on what they really mean and what they're trying to cloud for me in terms of information.
And the key legislation question I have for you is if there's any particular legislation that small business owners and entrepreneurs or people who, you know, might be in that creative space and are thinking about something in the future, perhaps, if there's anything that they should be focusing on or zeroing in on, what would you recommend when it comes to legislation?
I think they should pay attention to the taxes, pay attention to whatever's happening with tax reform. You know, small business it's a really broad term.
Right.
Small business can be a solopreneur, one person running a business. It can be more than 100 employees in a company.
Right.
And so for Black-owned businesses in particular, which we were focused on at the Chamber, that's 85% of Black-owned businesses are one employee, maybe up to 5 employees. And so when you're looking at policies that affect them, the ACA was actually really helpful. How many entrepreneurs go without health care or went without health care before the ACA? Really looking at what the SBA, what the Small Business Administration is doing around structuring how you access information in entrepreneurship. Because there's so many things, there's so many agencies within the Small Business Administration.
Right.
You don't know which one to go to first. You don't know whether you want to go to the Women's Business Center, to the SBDC, to all these other acronyms. It's alphabet soup.
Right.
And so I think entrepreneurs can really benefit from more attention being paid to how these services are delivered. And anything else that really helps with the social safety net. We're now in this gig economy where people are doing a lot of different things that don't offer benefits.
Right.
And when you don't have that security, entrepreneurship becomes even riskier than it's already.
Right. Well, you know, we're running out of time here, and I wanted to make sure I let people know whether or not you are still publishing titles under Wording Word. Is there any work that you're doing in that space?
Sure, but I haven't done it in a while. That's probably what's neglected the most. Our next book is likely going to be another book of poetry. The first book I published was actually in my father's manuscript, and I have another one. And then also I'm looking at potentially a book on leveraging LinkedIn.
Okay.
Probably.
Yeah, that's well needed, certainly needed.
Probably publishing that even in the Hypatia Institute in using Wording Word as our publisher.
Wow. Well, Gia, is there any other points that you want to leave behind for our audience before we wrap up?
I would just say plan. Do what you really want. Don't let people hold you back. Just go for what you want.
And how can people get in touch with you?
Sure. I am at G Honeycutt. That's GHONEYCUTT at HypatianInstitute.org. And again, Hypatian is HYPATIAN Institute.org.
Right. Thank you so much again for joining us this week. And we'll have you back again. I mean, especially when you talk about policy and legislation, and as our political climate continues to evolve and warm up, you know, we probably would need to have you come back in and help people understand what all this means and how it can continue to impact small business ownership and the ability for people to create things for themselves and put it out into the marketplace. And so, you know, when you're not tapped into that understanding of policy and legislation, and you're dwelling at a lower level, you know, it's okay. But when you start to grow your business, start to expand it, and then you're stopped by certain roadblocks, then it becomes so much more important to have had a foundation in something that, you know, will help you understand how to navigate the laws and so forth. So thank you so much for tuning in to this week's edition of Think Big. I am your host, Akia Garnett. I was joined this week by Gia Honeycutt, and you need to find her at the Hypatian Institute and see the things that she's doing. If if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in undergraduate, and if you're an undergraduate student and you're out there and you're trying to determine what's next for you in terms of leadership, where you can go, and if you need some help, thinking about these things and trying to determine what resources you need to tap into so that you can move yourself forward, reach out to Gia Honeycutt. She'll help you in that space and so much more. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next week.